Afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to today's webinar on mining sustainability and security in South Africa's mining industry. Illegal mining and the illicit trafficking of precious metals constitutes a multi-billion-dollar transnational criminal industry that has lasting social, economic, and environmental consequences. Join our panel of experts as they discuss ways to address these issues. Our webinar today is sponsored by Digby Wells Environmental, Astron Energy, Access House, DRD Gold, and MLT Group. We thank our sponsors for their support in making this event possible. Before we get started, please be aware that we've enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A box. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will answer as many of your questions as possible during the webinar. To encourage interaction, we've also enabled the chat function. You'll also find this at the bottom of your screen. Please remember not to post any questions in the chat box, though, as we might miss them. You can post those into the Q&A instead. Please be aware we are recording this webinar and we'll be sending the recording to you when it's available. We're also streaming the webinar live to YouTube, and we'll share the link in the chat once it's available. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Andries Rousseau, the Africa Energy Utilities and Resources Leader at PwC. He's a seasoned JSE accredited audit and strategy partner who joined PwC in 1997 and became a partner in 2007. Andries oversees PwC's South African and global mine publications, offering comprehensive industry insights. Beyond mining, he has also worked with clients in retail, manufacturing, forestry, agriculture, banking, and insurance. Andries will facilitate the discussion with our panel, which consists of Neil Pretorius, the CEO of DRD Gold, Graham Trussler, the CEO of Digby Wells Environmental, Brigadier Henny Flynn, Provincial Commander of the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation of the South African Police Service, and Nash Lutchman, a mining and allied security professional. I'll hand over now to our facilitator, Andries Rousseau, to continue with the proceedings. Over to you, Andries.
Thanks, Shannon, and thank you everyone for joining. We're really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon, and we want to make it a conversation on the panel, but also for answering your questions throughout. So don't be shy, please post those. I'm going to ask the panelists just to quickly introduce them. You've got their titles, so I think that's well known, but Graham, if you want to make a start, just in a quick introduction, background on yourself.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I hope it's going to be a nice, productive session. I started off my career with a big mining house, then ran mines as a metallurgical graduate and spent a lot of time in production in coal, platinum, vanadium, etc. And then with a few guys founded Digby Wells Environmental in 1995, and we do a lot of the consultation of foreclosure plans and dealing with the communities around these closed sites. So very interested to hear what the panel has to say, and hopefully we can advance this important discussion. Thanks, Andries.
Okay. Neil?
Thanks, Andries. Excuse me, it's Neil Pretorius, and I joined DRD just over 21 years ago. Before that, I was an attorney. I practiced law. And my journey with DRD really has been one of bringing sustainability and sustainable development into our mining model, into our strategic thinking. And I think during the course of this conversation, hopefully I'll be able to share more of how we've done that to the point now where it's become very much part of our brand identity.
Nash?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Nash Lutchman. I used to be a career policeman for almost 17 years. Left the police in 2004 to join the private security industry, ended up in mining security for the last 20 years. I've had the privilege of leading the function at the De Beers group of companies as far as its South African consolidated mines were concerned. Moved on to Goldfields Limited and then to Sibanye Gold, which obviously has become Sibanye-Stillwater from its birth in 2012-13. And I am now, I believe, in semi-retirement, but I think the journey of 37 years of law enforcement has been a great one. And I've seen the crime landscape shift from being almost a nuisance type of phenomenon to a phenomenon that has vastly taken over the fabric of social life and business and everything in the country, which has become a really, really broad threat that impacts life at various levels. Thank you.
Thanks, Nash. Henny, and you're still very much in the swing of the crime fight, so please go.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Henny Flynn. We appreciate the opportunity to address you. I am within the DPCI since its inception in 2009. I'm a career police officer. I've spent the last 36 years within the organized crime environment, where I've dealt with extensively with precious metals and diamonds related investigations. And currently, I'm also responsible for national priority offences within the directorate, which includes specific violent crimes and then serious organized crime in general. Thank you, Andries.
Thanks, Henny. So when we talk about sustainability and with that security, it was very evident earlier in the year at the mining in Indaba. President Ramaphosa included criminality around mining with the likes of energy security, the Transnet, and then logistical challenges that our mining industry has faced as one of the key challenges. I attend a number of board and risk committee type meetings, and it's quite often that criminality in the mining space comes up as one of the top risks for those mining companies. From PwC side, we certainly believe that the socioeconomic environment around mines is one of the key risks impacting mining operations, and that often represents itself in criminality, either for illegal mining or other criminal actions in the mining value chain. And then what we've noticed in the last few years is that the rehabilitation or lack of rehabilitation on some mining sites opens the opportunity for illegal mining, and that creates a value chain which is added on to other criminal elements. So Graham, I want to start with you. DP Wells looks after rehabilitation for a lot of mining companies, advise them, strategize with them. But this link between security and mine rehabilitation, do you just want to talk us through the strategies that you at DP Wells with your mining company clients do in order to follow up on proper rehabilitation?
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, because we can do whatever we like on the rehabilitation side, but if it's not effective, it's not fit for purpose, and we shouldn't be doing it. So we often speak to these poor communities that are surrounding these dumps or mine sites, and they're just inundated with criminals passing them by or shooting, or fearful for their kids falling down holes and shafts and things. So we spent quite a lot of time with our clients planning the closure properly. But what's been a new element recently is some of the mining houses are doing social closure plans, which are essential and need to feed into the physical reclamation rehabilitation. And I think when we talk about these criminal syndicates, they're mostly focused on the high value metals, and in South Africa, the ones is gold mining. So the real problem ones are, from a safety perspective, is the underground operations. And the DMR has just got a simple philosophy of you need to seal the top of the shaft. But these guys have got a very clever way of getting around it, digging through it, or using ventilation shafts, which are at an angle and can walk down it. So we really need to work harder at sealing those shafts properly. And a lot of these guys are not in this mining because it's fun. It really is hard work. It's dangerous work. They sell their products higher up the value chain. So I think one mustn't just look at the poor guy with dirt on him mining or doing it underground, but you must go higher up the chain. And obviously they need a lot of support from people to export their products, to supply them with goods, etc. So it's a whole ecosystem around them. But we need to work together with the communities around these shafts and around these mines to make sure that there is a plan physically, and to retrain and reskill the workers when they do get retrenched. I mean, you'd all remember we had probably 800,000 mine workers, 2 decades ago, and I don't know what it is down to now, but the older guys might retire to wherever they've come from, but the new generation can't. They've got to eke out a living, and there is no other socioeconomic opportunity for them. So these people are desperate. There's no other work opportunity, and they get stuck in because this does produce real cash.
That's very true. At the moment, about 450,000 people, so a big drop off in direct employment, and then much more in the indirect chains. Neil, but you mentioned socio or sustainability is core to your strategy. And in many ways, DRD is cleaning up the legacy of what the rest of the mining industry, at least in the gold side, has left them. How do you see sustainability and the way forward, and how do you tackle that as a company?
Yeah, so Andries, we adopted sustainable development as core to our strategic thinking, and as a primary consideration in terms of the deployment of resources and capital quite a number of years ago. And that's not because we thought that it was a cute idea. It was because of where we were, right here in the middle of Johannesburg, and the nature of our operations. So it lends itself to sustainable development. And with sustainable development, we sort of separated out over time. We've separated out different aspects of sustainability, or sustainable development rather. Typically, when people talk about sustainability, they really mean financial sustainability, or if they want to talk about social and environmental nowadays, they use the term ESG. So when we talk sustainability, we really talk about sustainable development and all 5 components, capital stocks that form part of sustainable development. And what we set out to achieve was a methodology in terms of which the value that we create in one of those capital stocks would also add value, or at the very least not detract from the value in any of the other capital stocks. So the technology that you employ, that should deliver into your environmental or natural capital. Your business model and the investments that you make should contribute towards social capital. And I think within the context of what we're discussing now, DRD being a company that doesn't produces a product that produces gold without adding any additional waste, that just uses existing waste and reprocesses that and moves it somewhere else. Within the context of that, the amount of water that we use, the amount of energy that we use, and where we are, what we want to try and achieve is an outcome where once we're done, not only would we have generated an income or a return for our shareholders, but we also want to deliver something into the environment itself in terms of restoration of the environment, but at the same time also deliver something sustainable in terms of the social environment, and do it in such a way that it creates independence, or that it contributes towards independence, and not add to the cycle of dependency. So for us, really, the way that we approach every project, the way that we approach every new dump, because most of the people who live in the vicinity of that dump typically, they're fighting poverty. It's a tough life. You seldom live right next to an old mine dump because you want to. You typically live there because there isn't anywhere else for you to go. So I mean, what we try to do is, as part of the whole setup, is right from the outset also establish relations in that community, because of the size and the scope of it, the extent to which we can really get involved is defined or structured around what we refer to as knowledge and a nudge. So it's the creation of opportunity to empower yourself with knowledge, and then to apply that knowledge to ultimately become self-sustainable. And in that way, hoping to achieve 2 things. On the one hand, a more stable community with less disruption, also of a criminal nature, whilst at the same time also, once we're done, leaving something behind that can exist independently of the mine. So it's really sort of a twofold. It's a twofold or a two-pronged approach. In terms of criminality within the context of sustainability, I mean, and Nash actually made a point earlier on about how this landscape has changed and how criminality has changed. So we're experiencing crime at various levels. There's the subsistence criminal. That's the person who sort of steals a piece of metal or whatever, and hoping to sell that by the end of the day. put some food on the table. That's sort of the one scale. Right up to organized crime, where people either come through your fence with semi-automatic weapons, or they establish syndicates inside and outside of your footprint, and they apply that to steal from you, steal gold or steal product. And of course, the way that you then set yourself up is in proportion to the risk, both in how you defend yourself, but also how you neutralize the threat. And then I think proportionality in terms of fighting crime has become a big topic to ensure that what you do that's effective, without really going overboard. So it's definitely become a far more complex exercise, and that it requires dedication and focus, but it certainly is doable. And I think our company is testimony to the fact that if you apply your mind and if you dedicate yourself to these principles, then you can in fact bring about an outcome and an ongoing process that can deliver overlapping value at different levels, including social, environmental, and commercial.
Excellent. Thanks, Neil. Nash, we've spoken a lot about the local socioeconomic environment around the mine itself and the impact that has, the type of stuff that Neil tries to address when he's got his sustainable plan for the future. But Graham mentioned the wider value chain, and it's evident if there's organized crime involved, there's a wider value chain involved. Can I ask you the regional challenges that we are facing in Southern Africa? I'm thinking Zimbabwe, the challenges they've had, but elsewhere as well, and the impact that has. So the regional socioeconomic environment and what impact that has on sustainability, but also criminality in our mining space.
Well, that's actually a very good and a very challenging question, Andres. I think if we start looking at the regional environment, particularly in the Southern African region, I think that economies and communities are plagued equally in terms of some of the woes from a socioeconomic perspective that our fellow South Africans are experiencing here. And dwindling resources, broad-based corruption, a general almost, this is global. It's not necessarily only something that is prevalent in Africa or Southern Africa. But if one looked at the indicators globally, you would find that obedience is probably too strong a word, but just complying with law and order seems to be quite challenging for populations and communities right across the globe. So if you rewind to 30, 40 years ago, then you found that communities in all parts of the world were more inclined to operate within the rule of law, to be compliant in terms of what is expected. And as the years have fast forwarded to the century we find ourselves in now, the date and time, there seems to be less commitment to that. So you find the very fabric of rule and order is, law and order and rule is disintegrating. And this manifests in many different ways, and not necessarily only purely in terms of crime, but in terms of other social pathos that we see. And one has to be careful in terms of considering what I'm saying when people start a process in broad scale to improve the lives of themselves and those around them, and start also moving to other geographical locations which appear to be the land of milk and honey and opportunity. And all of this is no longer defined in a way that is easily identifiable, because an opportunity does not necessarily mean an opportunity for employment or to be actively involved in the economy in any legal way. It could also be opportunities in terms of crime and criminality. And to some extent, our neighboring countries to South Africa have largely depended on South Africa. And I suppose there was a bit of mutual dependence on each other. But when it came to economic dependence, there was very strong ties to our neighboring countries in terms of South Africa being, for example, a trade partner, being a partner that provided employment opportunities for citizens, and in many walks of engineering and other social aspects such as water and electricity and so on. There has been that kind of relationship. So there is a shift of people, from other regions into South Africa and from South Africa upward. But I think the general almost disintegration of law and order in terms of border control, in terms of serious and violent crime that is taking place in this particular region does lend itself to South Africa being a very favorable destination for those that might want to engage in nefarious purposes. And I suppose Henny will be better suited to really talk about those particular aspects. But what I want to say before I really land the answer to your question, Andres, is in this general, let's call it regression of rule, of law, of order, of social fabric, etc., there are, in my mind, 4 particular ingredients that, if you could use the word ingredients, that actually provide a prosperous ecosystem, if you will, for organized crime. And South Africa ticks the box in almost all of those 4. So the first one, to my mind, is economic inequality. And according to the Gini Index, South Africa obviously is the #1 country with the greatest inequality economically between its people. Number 2 is a rampant crime rate. I don't think I need to convince anybody on this webinar around the rampant crime rate that we're experiencing in the country. Widespread corruption, meaning from government to corporates to individual people. And then poorly performing state organs. And we've had that issue now becoming worse and worse over the last few years in terms of the state organs that have been eroded in various ways, influences. And I think just the output in terms of that is important is that they're now poorly performing. And when those 4 things come together in a perfect storm, you find that organized criminal syndicates embed themselves, and that's exactly what has happened to South Africa. Organized criminal syndicates have embedded themselves in South Africa. And what we see with the uptick in terms of street crime, other violent crimes such as robberies, hijacking, house invasions, fraud, corruption, etc., are merely symptomatic of the fact that organized crime syndicates have embedded themselves, and these criminal enterprises are driven unhampered by the rule of law and order. Employment opportunities, social pathos relating to other aspects becomes a little bit more squeezed in terms of emerging democracies and other states. And this whole perception of mining and South Africa providing for others a means to be able to involved in meaningful economic activities, whether it's legal or criminal, is out there. And that kind of narrative does impact how the people move, the activities that they get involved in, and the type of criminal risks that start facing not only South Africa in general, but the mining industry. And I think I want to stop waffling here and just say that illegal mining is only about one of the serious crime threats that actually impact the mining industry. Other risks relate to communities, to fraud, to corruption, armed attacks, armed robberies. So there's a whole myriad of criminal risks that creates a very challenging environment for the mining industry and other industry per se. But it becomes attractive to the mining industry purely because you've got an embedded organized criminal enterprises running, and they've diversified. Your indications in terms of street level crime and other serious and violent crime has gone rampant, and that is clearly something that you can see in terms of the armed attacks and so on and so forth. The fact that we have poorly performing state organs, courts that are backlogged in terms of cases that need to be processed, and erosion of skill sets in these departments as well, just makes it all the more difficult to pull back from a really daunting situation in terms of the crime challenge facing mining.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a number of the challenges beyond illegal mining. The reality is that damaging infrastructure, whether that's transport or energy generation or transmission infrastructure, I think has got a massive impact on the mining industry, even though it's not illegal mining. But over that 36 years, it's apparent from what everyone else has said that you've been in the police. We've lived in a very changed and worse environment from a crime point of view, but the police are doing a lot. And perhaps you can just tell us, high level, what are the police doing, and also achievements of the police, because there are some successes, and you've had some fantastic successes recently.
Andries, yeah, thank you. Indeed, there's a lot of work being done. A lot of good work is being done on a continuous basis. And it's the focus of the South African Police Service to focus on the whole value chain, because if we do not deal with the whole value chain, we will be fragmented in our approach. And I can perhaps just highlight a few recent successes that depict the good work that's being done by our detectives at ground level. During an incident at the Scott Shaft here in Stilfontein, when the team embarked on the operation, they had to use explosives to gain access to the shaft, as the criminals embedded themselves on the inside of the shaft to such an extent that we could not gain easily access to the area. The team was very surprised to recover during that operation a Wi-Fi system, a fully functional Wi-Fi system, where the logistical hub on surface was connected to the illegal miners underground. And then the criminals also fortified their position to such an extent that they had 24 rifles ready to take on any onslaught by either the police or rival groups. That armory included 15 AK-47s, one R5 rifle, a number of shotguns and hunting rifles. They were also very well equipped in terms of ammunition. They had more than 6,000 rounds of ammunition. Now, it's the approach of the DPCI that with this serious matters, we on a continuous basis oppose bail. Now, during this operation, 21 accused were arrested, and we managed to secure that 20 of them are still being detained in custody, and we hope to finalize that matter soon. In addition to that, as we all know, the illegal mining activities go far beyond just gold smuggling. It also includes the theft of platinum, extensive illegal chrome mining that's continuing, as well as diamond mining that's continuing specifically in the Northern Cape. Now, in one of the matters, we managed to dismantle a chrome syndicate towards Limpopo province, although they were fully functional in Northwest, where they were mining on an industrial scale with excavators, etc. And you can just imagine the extent of the land degradation that was taking place there, as well as water pollution and all the additional problems that occurs for the neighboring communities. Then, in terms of convictions, I believe that the courts are taking these matters extremely serious. In a matter yesterday in the regional court in Limpopo, an accused was sentenced to 17 years imprisonment for the theft of platinum from one of the mines in the Limpopo province. In another matter, an accused was sentenced to 22 years imprisonment, which was related to an armed attack at one of the local mines here in Stilfontein. I believe that also the asset forfeiture unit, as part of a multidisciplinary approach, are doing their part on a continuous basis. I believe that everybody is privy to the most recent seizure of a number of assets from high-profile syndicate members in Gauteng. And then the question is also is always posed in terms of that communities do not see that we really address the apex role players and the facilitators and the creators of this threat. I would like to indicate to everybody that whenever we are dealing with the apex role players, it takes time and a lot of effort to gather sufficient evidence to prosecute these individuals in our courts. If I can perhaps just highlight one of our flagship cases, we managed to dismantle a gold smuggling syndicate with transnational links, where we can prove that they smuggled in excess of 1 billion rands gold out of the Republic. Obviously, with that goes money laundering charges, which, as we speak, is affecting the country adversely in terms of the grey listing, where we need to do all in our power to get out of the grey listing, and that we will be able to function fully. So it's critical that we need to not just focus on the predicate offences, but also on the secondary money laundering offences that's taking part. Now, in terms of that specific investigation, it's important to know that we are receiving excellent support from the international law enforcement community. We have embarked on mutual legal assistance processes and extradition proceedings, because we need to get the kingpins before the South African courts so that the matter can be dealt with decisively. Having said that, there's still a lot of work to be done within our multidisciplinary approach, and we need the support and ongoing support of the private security industry and the mining industry to be successful in our approach to mitigate this continuous threat. Thank you, Andries.
Thanks, Eddie. And perhaps I can ask you, the question has been posed. So if you become aware of illegal mining, where do you report that? And what's the process on that? With that illegal chrome mining there in Limpopo and Mpumalanga on the eastern limb, I mean, it was very obvious to a lot of people driving past, including DMRE, that this is illegal mining happening with big yellow goods. But where do we report those things? So if you put that out to the public, where should these matters be reported?
Well, the normal run-of-the-mill procedure is that criminality needs to be reported to the nearest police station. So obviously that's then the first responders. But when it is of such a nature that there's perhaps police officers involved or there's corruption at a high level, I believe that I will be in a position to provide to the Secretariat the particulars of the local organized crime units and the anti-corruption units within the specific provinces or the affected provinces. And individuals are welcome then to, especially whistleblowers or prospective informers, are then welcome to provide those information directly to us. If it's, for instance, a landowner that's being affected, the entry point obviously will then be to report the matter to the nearest police station, and then it will be escalated to the nearest DPCI officers who will deal with it.
Thanks, Eddie. Graham, Eddie mentioned that illegal mining creates environmental damage, whether that's water or land degradation. Now, when you're a mining company, you've got a mining license, you need to comply with rehabilitation requirements. You just want to tell us quickly, well, what can the law do around mining companies not complying on the one side with rehabilitation requirements? And then secondly, what happens in the case where you've got illegal mining that results in this environmental damage? Who foots the bill for that? There's a perception that we've got a lot of mines just left out, the unrehabilitated, which creates some of these problems. And who should be held accountable?
I think it's absolutely true that there's a lot of mines left out there with people having disappeared, and that becomes part of the state's problem because there's a lot of ownerless mines which the state has taken on, and they've only got a limited amount of resources, so that reclamation or rehabilitation is going to take a very long time. But I think we should focus on where there are active mining companies, there are people, they need to put away money for rehabilitation. That needs to be checked by the DMRE and make sure that they're actually doing it. And I think that's a big gap, is to make sure that the people keep up with concurrent rehabilitation, because that is part of the law. They need to, what they have disturbed and can be reclaimed, they need to do that. And that's not happening. Where I think there is a good link now is that a lot of the directors can be held liable if they've been negligent or not fulfilling their roles. And I think that does make people sit up a little bit more carefully and consider their roles on boards, or officers which are appointed by the mining companies need to do certain things. But it is not that difficult. If you're an operating mining company, you've got impacts on the land, whether you're an open cast coal mine or reclaiming dumps like Neil is. It's got to be part of your whole system to leave it in a better way afterwards. And I think for gold mining properties, there's some great opportunities. DRD reclaims land, and there's a lot of very good examples where there's shopping centers or office blocks, etc., on that land again. Obviously, not all of these things are in the middle of Joburg like the original dumps. But I think people talk about a just transition, but that normally only speaks about coal mining industry, and one must think of the vested interests and why they just talk about a just transition and forget about the hundreds of thousands of gold mine workers which have just been lost. And nobody really cares about the guys sitting in Welkom or Stilfontein or Carltonville. Those people are poor and desperate. So I think there's great opportunities on those mine properties to develop it into something else and more useful, maybe a renewable energy space or wood lots or beekeeping or whatever. If you put up solar plants, for instance, on these tailings dams, there's all the infrastructure to evacuate that power. All the power lines used to run into the mines. We can get it out. Yeah. We're desperate for energy. Why don't we use these areas of land which become available?
Thanks, Graham. Neil, and perhaps you can talk to that quickly, because I know energy is part of a plan on your side as well. But when you rehabilitate, clearly you're moving a dump from one place to the other, as you said earlier. What do you do differently now from what was done 50, 80 years ago when those dumps were initially put down to make it sustainable for the future? And then I'm very interested to hear about usage of the land, whether it's office parks or whether it's solar plants. What is the thinking around that? So making the current property sustainable for the future to address these local challenges.
Yeah. So Andres, I think and it's important to keep in mind that the mine didn't come to the city. The city came to the mine, if you look at the Johannesburg landscape. So initially when mining was started in and around the Johannesburg area, we're talking more than 100 years ago. So there was very little in the way of environmental regulation. So you built tailings dumps or mine dumps where they were the most convenient. And that was typically lower lying areas, because many of the initial hoppers were pulled by animals, by mules. So you want the full little hopper to be pulled downhill and the empty one to be pulled uphill. So as a consequence, many of these mine dumps ended up in areas that were environmentally sensitive. So a big part of what we do, and there are many of those sites, in fact, involve the cleaning up of land in former wetlands. And those wetlands are also becoming restored, because obviously the water level is now starting to rise again. You don't have the level of dewatering that you used to have at a time when there were all these deep level mines in and around the Johannesburg area. So there's that one part of it, is the moving of dumps from areas that are environmentally sensitive. And then, of course, many of the older dumps have also become surrounded by communities. They move closer and closer, the urban sprawl, especially in the more recent few decades, the last 3-4 decades. The perimeter that was being maintained around mine dumps had all become ignored, and many communities now live virtually on top of those mine dumps. And oftentimes those mine dumps it's right there in the middle of the city. It's where people could either live or where you could establish a business hub or a light industrial hub, and people don't have to commute for the distances that they do. So in those instances, and we've had several of those too, Graham's referred to them, the mine dumps moved, and the land that's now, it's like opening up a little piece of land right in the middle of an established residential purposes, or for light industrial, or just an open area. Of course, the challenge for us nowadays is that many of these pieces of land, the ones that we clear, don't belong to DRD. The ones further east do, and there obviously we've got plans to put it to sustainable use. But what you don't want is a situation where you substitute one problem with another. So, the one day you're living next to a mine dump, and after 3 years, DRD's removed it, they've cleared the site, it's beautiful, it's sort of restored, and then only to become a dump site for building refuse or for an informal settlement or something to that effect. So we do keep close track of what happens to the land afterwards, and by the time that we return it to the owner, some of those are private owners, and other instances it belongs to the city of Johannesburg. Obviously, you would want to see that something that does happen with it, that it does become, that it is put to use in a sustainable way. The difference between the ultimate storage of these dumps is obviously now you have a more concentrated dump. It's further away from the city. We pump slime 30, 40, 50 kilometers away. And it's also being run in to a different set of standards, to a different code. The GISTM didn't apply 20, 30, 40 years ago. The standards of environmental governance involved in the management of tailings, the safety standards and so forth, I don't think they were necessarily inadequate, because we don't have a bad track record when it comes to tailings safety, but these are evolving standards, and obviously, we've committed to those standards, and we try to manage the tailings facilities that we have. We try to manage them to those standards. So it's a different practice for a different sort of environment, where people are far more aware of that which they are legitimately entitled to in terms of a clean environment, and trying to deliver into that, notwithstanding the fact that environment had changed because people had moved closer. I think in terms of concurrent rehabilitation and just the mess that's been left behind on some of those mines, and regrettably, you see some of those things happening also in recent time. I mean, in the last 10 years, in and around the Johannesburg area, there were two companies. One was listed in London and the other one was listed in Perth. And they arrived in South Africa and they dug holes all around the Johannesburg landscape, and they never filled those holes. And it was just poorly regulated, and it wasn't followed upon properly. But I think in terms of responsible mining companies, and these are typically the ones that you would find in South Africa, not necessarily just the larger ones, but the people that are just run with, the companies that are run by people with a social and environmental conscience, you find that increasingly they're starting to implement concurrent rehabilitation. You're seeing fewer instances where companies sell assets sort of within 2 or 3 or 5 years of its ultimate demise, and leaving it in the hands of entities that are simply just not capable of dealing with rehabilitation. Because in South Africa, for as long as the current dispensation applies, where you only get back the money that you invest in rehabilitation after you've in fact completed the rehabilitation, for as long as that regime applies, the only rehabilitation that will take place is rehabilitation that takes place during the life of an operation. Once that operation goes into distress, once it starts closing down, the gap between liquidation proceedings, for example, and environmental closure, the competencies that the regulator has to apply funds towards rehabilitation, and so that gap is just so enormous that we know that rehabilitation then simply just it doesn't take place. So concurrent rehabilitation on the back of environmental and social conscience, that's really the only way that mines are going to get rehabilitated in South Africa. And hopefully our methodology, although we're coming in sort of at the tail end and we're only dealing with tailings, but our methodology of cleaning up as you go along and vegetating as you go along, rehabilitating as you go along, hopefully, we are some ways up that new standard that is required to in fact have a situation that you're at a point when the revenues dry up after you've mined out the resource. Most of the closure has also been done, and that you have a site that's almost rehabilitated.
Thanks, Neil. Nash, you were head of security for a number of our big preeminent companies in the country. Can I ask you about strategies that our main mining companies are following today around the security environment? And if not, what they're doing, what they should be doing.
So I'm looking at you all guys, because that's what we should be doing, what we are doing, and so on and so forth. And I think Yeah, like I've mentioned, the companies I've already worked for before, so I'm not going to allude to them specifically again. But I think it's common cause that mining industry is really operating in an unprecedented security risk environment currently, and speaking specifically around crime and security risks. And like I mentioned in my introduction, these risks has rapidly evolved over the last 30 years. Some mining houses, unfortunately, in my mind, have been slow to respond to these. Other mining houses lack the skill sets required to manage these security risks. Because remember, these risks are very different from, and Neil's given a good history, and that's a fascinating story about where the dumps are located, for example. You got to go back to 1880s, hundreds of years ago. And the risk from an operational perspective of mining, given that long breadth of mining in terms of age, has been primarily around health and safety, fall of ground, seismicity, depth, gas, all sorts of water, those kind of risks. So, and I think the mining industry has done well over the last 100 odd years to try and get ahead of these operational risks that I've mentioned. But if you do not have security professionals that are dealing with security and crime related risks, then that is a particular problem, because like I said, security and criminal risks are a completely different risk from those operational risks. That's number one. And this becomes, as I pointed out earlier as well, becomes very important given the current criminal landscape. I mean, the South African president, Henny, is here for that. Sorry, Henny. The minister would talk about, I don't know, 22, 30 categories of serious crime on which they would be collecting and recording the stats. So it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's more than illegal mining. This kind of criminal landscapes lends itself to threatening the mining industry and any business for that matter on various levels of the business. So you've got pure blunt force, security crime risk, home robberies, that kind of thing. You have the stealth in terms of internal corruption and external corruption that finds its way into its supply chain management, its human resources. Without strong, centralized governance and risk control functions in a strategy to protect the mining industry, specifically we're speaking today about, that's going to be problematic. And I've just read an interesting article this morning about something that happened over a period of 10 years, but SARS apparently has filed a claim against Sasfin to the tune of 4.8 billion. And they're targeting a potential 9 billion rand that apparently was facilitated through the banks, through Sasfin, in terms of offshore investments that didn't go through the right channels. And, Mr. Sassoon has said that when they looked at the internal governance and risk control functions at Sasfin, they were found to be wanting. That's a typical example of how, if these functions are not centralized and form part of your security strategy, there are other things that may happen, which feeds back into what we're talking about today, whether it's illegal mining, environmental crime, corruption, etc., because everything has become so integrated. And remember, the four things that I often speak to in discussions is the rampant crime rates, widespread corruption, underperforming state organs, and economic inequality. These things drive all sorts of criminal behavior against businesses, and mining is no exception. So this strategy, a security strategy, would need to be integrated into not only the core, but the support functions of the mining industry. And it has to be driven centrally, because risk and governance control just is equally as important to ensure that the mining industry or that particular company is on track. Whereas you're not only providing a tactical response or blunt force for crimes that you know that you're experiencing. And a typical small mining house should have this at executive level, exco level. A multinational company should have this sitting at C-suite, because that is where the strategy needs to be developed. And when I say it needs to be integrated into the core and support functions, then security and crime risks that would emanate, and I'll just pick some functions from the array of companies that I worked with. For example, say sales and marketing as its own share of security and crime risk. Also impacted by geopolitical changes. So if you're not having, as a multinational, a machinery that looks at security risk from a geopolitical perspective and how does that impact business decision making, your sales and marketing, or what might be required. COVID and the Ukrainian war in particular has demonstrated to businesses in South Africa how important geopolitics is and how important it is to be focused on that. But Neil should not be focused on that. Neil is busy with managing a big company, which has a specific model and a specific business goals to achieve, and he should worry about that. A security professional should be worrying about how they deal with those aspects and blend that into the decision-making process. Let's bring this back not to business, but to crime and criminality. And so that intelligence, if you will, security risk information, business information, needs to be dealt with that information flow by a fully fledged intelligence unit, information unit. That needs to feed back into the law enforcement decision-making and actions that would need to take place. So key is for that strategy to be integrated with your core and your support business functions. Other components of the strategy should include, you must, given the current scenario that most businesses and individuals are facing with crime and criminality, have a component of blunt force, which means highly trained tactical response officers equipped specifically with the right gear, armored vehicles, because it is commonplace now in South Africa for gangs of people to approach a mining business armed with high caliber rifles, automatic rifles, armor-piercing bullets, or ammunition to do what they need to do. And certainly can't send people there in soft-skin bakkies, not trained to do this. And I'm not being disrespectful to the security, the whole security universe, but if a security officer is trained to be able to just show presence in a shopping mall or a casino or on the beach, wherever, you can't have that type of individual deployed in mining security, where we've seen the challenge of hostile criminal intent. Number of incidents. A big company will demonstrate that there are almost 90 incidents every quarter. That's one a day. Of serious violent attack on its operation. So a tactical response has to be there. You need to have a very specialized investigation focus. And again, this has to deal with, and look, some companies have, I'm no longer part of a we, some companies have a great relationship with the DPCI, with other state organs. And it's only through those relationships that you are able to shift the needle when it comes to identifying and dealing with criminal syndicates. And like Henny said, you got to do the whole value chain, because you can't just pick pieces that you want to deal with it. So having that stakeholder component with your internal and external stakeholders, mining houses have, until state organs are better capacitated and better able to deal with the challenges that we're currently experiencing. If the mining houses do not have almost mirroring functions within its strategy, so investigations, specialized investigations in terms of metals-related theft, specialized investigation in terms of commercial crimes, corruption, and so on, and dealing with that, you're going to find that we are always on the back foot. So mining companies that have stayed in step with what is happening and have a back-to-front security solution, has a strategy that is interlinked with all of its functions, that has a portion that is dealing with intelligence. And of course, the other aspect in terms of stakeholders is ensuring that your community-facing strategies also have principles of security drivers in that strategy to be able to deal with that. Now, not all communities, we can't tar every member of the community with the same brush. But we have to understand that there's almost a relationship between Neil speaks about proportionality from a law perspective. But if you just look at it from a perspective of a mine within a community, and I speak from experiences with 3 mining houses that I work for, the real crime and security challenges actually come from those communities. Now, that sounds terrible because not all of the communities around the mining houses have criminal intent against the business. But it is a reality that, to some extent, let's go back to the West Wits, where you have illegal gold miners. And these are people we're not talking about. I saw that there was a comment, there was a comment made about derelict mines and so on. And it's a different approach that one would need there. But operating gold mines in this country, operating gold mines, are experiencing a problem of illegal miners mining underground within operating mines at depths of 2 or 3 kilometers underground. And so this is not an issue of something is happening somewhere where, this poses all of the environmental threats, and it shows you some of the ugly warts that we have in terms of a destroyed social fabric. But this creates problems for operating mines. So the strategy needs to be able to incorporate that. And unfortunately, communities play a significant role in aiding and abetting the illegal miners. I mean, they harbor in, and we're not, again, I want to reiterate, we're not punishing the entire community or communities around the mine with the same brush. But we have seen members of community harbor illegal miners, equip illegal miners, provide other services to them that we don't want to even go into, but create huge logistical supply chains in terms of food, medication, a whole communication network. I mean, we're talking about 4IR now, and and communicating through AI media and with QR codes and so on. But communities are actually aiding illegal miners, like back in the days of the pigeon, where handwritten notes are actually being transported through various levels back to the homes of illegal miners and so on and so forth. So a very strong community-facing strategy or component needs to be part of that security strategy, because communities also needs to understand that for the sustainability of the business and the sustainability of the community. And I like the notion of sustainability after mines have closed, although that is going to prove to be quite challenging from an economic perspective. But what is their roles in terms of how communities deal with this? And somebody asked a question on the chat in terms of the cost of living, unemployment, etc. How does that contribute to crime? I mean, clearly it does. In real terms, unemployment in a highly industrialized and mining intensive province like the Northwest is sitting at 53%. It's unbelievable. But that does play a role in terms of how these things happen. And getting back to sustainability projects are not my field, but I think actively involving communities in programs of worthwhile pursuit would be one of the ways of actually dampening, let's call it, the criminal elements that actually thrive out of the communities, etc. So no, certainly in terms of that, you probably need all of those components in a strategy to be able to deal with this holistically. It is not something that you should be dealing on a reactive basis with. And I apologize for a long-winded answer. Over to you, Andrew.
No, but I think it's very valuable long-winded answer. You did say Neil cannot do anything, he needs a security. So quick answer. What is the budget that should go to security that Neil should approve on his side? You can give it in rand numbers, or you can give it a percentage of revenue numbers.
Are you asking me that question, Andres? Because I don't want to
answer. I am asking you that question because you were heading up those things.
I don't want to answer for Neil Pretorius, but what I want to say is, I mean, look, we didn't touch on everything, but having that ability, I know I'm very long-winded, but having that ability to actually visualize your prioritized risks is what should inform the security budget. So it's not really about a percentage of your revenue and this, that, or the other. It is the impact of those priority risks that could have the negative impact that will have in your business. And the downside to that, in terms of what you're saying is in your business plan. And the propensity of those risks and the likelihood of those risks materializing, that it should inform the budget. So don't build fat in the budget, but make sure you've got your risks clearly visualized, that you understand the impact if those risks are not managed, avoided, whatever the case might be, and a budget is tailor-made to provide services to ensure that those risks are mitigated. I'm not going to go with a fraction of revenue or cost.
Perfect. I like that. We're at 3 o'clock. We're going to run to 3:15 to answer some of the questions. But I just want to come to you. Nash spoke about resources that companies can provide. We know you've partnered with the Defence Force for some of your operations, but I also would like to understand, do you have enough resources? What do you do to supplement those resources? And then what role does private sector have? So is there a role for collaboration between the private sector security companies that you alluded to earlier when you spoke, the stuff that Nash spoke to, working with the police? How do we address the resource challenges that you have?
Thank you. Yes, indeed. From the directorate side, I believe that we are well resourced. We've got sufficient physical resources, human resources, and financial resources to adequately deal with the threat at our level. As I stated earlier, we are not dealing with all the matters that affects the mining communities, but with the cases that's referred to us and project-driven investigations, we are indeed adequately resourced. In addition to that, I can also indicate that within the directorate, there's a new component being created, the forensic accounting investigation component, where these experts, including chartered accountants, are assisting us with the forensic part in terms of the financial investigations. Then critical in the fight against illegal mining, if we speak about it under an umbrella reference, is a healthy working relationship and good collaboration with the mining industry. It is critical because we are dealing with the same suspects. Individuals that comes onto the radar of the DPCI at a very high level is already perhaps on the radar of the mine security intelligence structures. So it is important that we work together, get all the pieces of the puzzle together, and then decide on an appropriate action steps and an investigation path to mitigate the threat and to get rid of that syndicate. So it's critical that we need to work together. If I can just briefly refer to the Defence Force, indeed, they are contributing towards successes. Although they work under the command of the South African Police Service, yes, indeed, there are force multipliers, and we can already see the impact that their manpower and resources are also contributing towards the fight of illegal mining. Thank you, Andries.
Thanks, Henny. We've got a number of questions, and we have addressed some of them as we went through. But I do want to ask Neil this question here on, you've got an extended footprint, you've got social labor plans in place, you've got a intended work with communities because you know that's the right thing to do and that's the only way to have a sustainable business. How do you deal with that big footprint, identifying the communities that you need to deal with, understanding the community's needs? So, for example, once you've cleared your the tailings dam that you are reprocessing, there's obviously an owner's requirement, but there'll also be a community requirement. How do you deal with understanding your community footprint and then complying with social labor plan commitments?
Yes, it's an area where we initially didn't do particularly well because we approached it on the basis of, we know what's best for you and we've got this wonderful plan, and, then you wait for applause and think that they're going to be very thankful for your generosity. And that turned out to be a nonsense approach. So what we've been focusing on more recently, and to say more recently, sort of the last 8 years or so, is establishing a network in terms of which we provide knowledge to assist people to take the very first step out of desperate poverty. And what we've seen is many of those, for them getting off the social grant system is almost like a badge. It's almost like I've worked myself out of dependency, and now using, and this is the more later iteration, now working off that network of probably about 5,000 families with programs that are a little bit more sophisticated and that are geared or aimed at providing guidance, providing the material to assist in establishing an enterprise, establishing a business that can function in the informal economy. With the number of people that are unemployed in South Africa and with the size of the informal economy, activating that informal economy and creating a situation where let's call it the social grants that flow into those economies or those communities on a monthly basis, where the capital is applied and reapplied within that economy, where you've got the multiple, the grocer buying from the baker, and the baker buying from the beverage salesperson, and so forth, and that's staying within that community, as opposed to the money coming into the community and somebody getting into a taxi and buying a blanket from Pep Stores, which is not in his community, so it just bounces through that community. So those are the programs that we're trying to launch, and the one that we've got in the University of Pretoria was very valuable in helping us to articulate this. Is a program that's based on 5 pillars, and the ultimate outcome. And these pillars are sort of your personal well-being, it's economic well-being, it's the aesthetics of the area itself, it's technology, mobilizing technology. That's a huge enabler for these communities. I mean, you could just look at cell phone payments and so forth. They don't need a bank. You could still be cashless. And then finally, sports and culture. So on those 5 pillars, trying to assist in by providing the material to build those and assist those communities to really build a sustainable economy, but in the format of an informal economy. So that's really how you approach that. And then obviously, with the size of our footprint, you're never going to have a complete solution. But all you really need are a small number of individuals that grab these opportunities and run with them. And then they have a way of just spiraling out. They really multiply by themselves. But short answer is the knowledge that you require to become active in the informal economy, and taking the capital that flows into the informal economy on a monthly basis, social grant money, and activating those or applying those in such a way that you do get to very effectively activate that informal economy. I think therein lies the answer.
Thanks.
The solution rather.
Thank you. Ini, there were a couple of questions around cross-border things. On the one side, it is the impact of lack of border control on criminality in the country, and the question was asked around Limpopo, but I think it impacts most of our provinces. And the second question is, well, who buys the illegal mining products, so going offshore? And to the extent that you can answer on that, can you comment on what the police is doing around border control and potentially the illegal mining associated with that? And then, but also cross-border interaction with other governments where final product potentially end up on. When you're on mute, there.
Thank you, Andries. Yes, indeed, the border management was taken over by the Border Management Authority. So they are predominantly responsible for border management. However, it is a known fact that there is indeed a big influx of foreigners from both Lesotho as well as Zimbabwe that cause, not just on the illegal mining front, but with crime in general, major problems to our country. Obviously, there's a lot of strategies that deal with this, which I obviously can't reveal here, but a lot is being done to arrest individuals at the point where they enter the Republic, so that they can be deported without undue delays. What's also important is to know that indeed there's a big influx of precious metals from neighboring countries, with specific reference to Zimbabwe, which is created by obviously a well embedded criminal networks that facilitate it. And to come to the question about who's facilitating it, obviously the commodities, whether it's gold, platinum, chrome, or diamonds, it finds its way onto the international buyers market. So the ultimate destination is the international market without referencing to any specific country. And where it is sold off, and then the money is returned to South Africa via complex money laundering rackets. And from there onwards, I would say from the national level to the lowest levels, it is to a large extent cash driven. which obviously makes it difficult to detect. And that is why we need to resort to unconventional methods and techniques to properly detect and investigate these criminality. Thank you, Andries.
Thanks, Annie. I'm going to wrap it up with just a 1 minute final word from each of the panelists about their view of the future. And Graham, I'm going to start with you, if you can give us your view on sustainability and security.
Thank you, Andries. Yeah, this is happening throughout Africa and a lot of the undeveloped world where law and order is not being applied. So it's not a unique thing to us. It's quite new in South Africa in that we were used to very regulated mining industry and now it's not. So I think we can learn a lot from other countries in Africa. We need to learn lessons on what to watch out for and how to close mines properly. But I do think it is possible. But there has to be a space for the people who want to do it properly. You know, we went from very big companies in this country. We probably had artisanal mining for many millennia before. But there is room for a middle ground of smaller guys who want to do it properly, who are not part of this criminal syndicates, but they must be given ownership and help to do it properly. That's my last bit. Thanks.
Thanks, Graham. I'm glad you touched on artisanal miners. It was one of the questions. So, Neil?
Yeah, look, I think South Africa still has a long and exciting future as a producer of minerals. I think we just need to have the right attitude. You've got to approach it with a can-do attitude, not a wait-and-see attitude. Obviously, you do have to collaborate, and you've got to collaborate in good faith. But then also face up to reality and understand when and the extent to which the conventional suppliers of services have become distressed and maybe under-resourced, and then you've got to do those things in the interim and until it's restored, and also collaborate to try and assist to restore those things. You've got to take your community seriously. They're an integral part. They're an important stakeholder, and they're an integral part of your future. So you can't treat them as an afterthought, and they're not a photo opportunity to show the world how generous you are. Your investment's got to be long-term. It's got to be sustainable and also effective. And then you've got to have faith. You've got to spend a bit of time on your knees. You put all those things together, and you might just end up being successful, surprisingly successful.
Thanks, Neil. Nash?
Thanks, Andries. I'll try and do this in a minute. And I think sustainability, the other experts that Henny and I can talk perhaps about the security aspects. And I think some of the challenges facing the mining industry in particular going forward from a security perspective is the lack of legislation, failure to even modify legislation to deal with illegal mining per se, or artisanal and small-scale mining. The political influence or rhetoric that actually is out there does create problems in terms of land invasions and house invasions and causes problems for the mine. I think I've already touched on this, and I feel very bad every time I mention it, Henny. Remember, I was there also. But the poorly performing state organs have to be helped along because that's going to create problems for us. I mean, for example, just dealing with organized crime and syndicates and just trying to police the second-hand goods market, the second-hand jewelry market, both of them together contribute to the illicit trade in metals, precious metals, as well as the illicit trade in copper and so on and so forth. We have a very disinterested regulator when it comes to the deteriorating security conditions around mining, and a rather apathetic government as well. You know, I mean, we seem to have a current government that does not recognize the downside associated with deteriorating security conditions around the mining industry. Given the Minerals Council statistics for 2023, it should leave the government a little bit more interested, I think, in terms of what is happening from a deteriorating security conditions perspective. You know, adding just over 6% to 425 billion rand to GDP, providing 476,000 direct jobs in the mining industry as of 2023. 90 billion in terms of company taxes that went through to the state coffers, further 31 billion that went through in terms of PAYE, and 14 billion rand in terms of royalties. I mean, that's a lot of billions that actually has been produced by the mining industry. So I think government needs to recognize what it needs to do to be able to preserve, and no favors here. It should be a broad blanket thing for the country, but certainly not turning a blind eye to the deteriorating security conditions. And remember, this is while mining is still a paying customer in terms of rates and taxes that we haven't touched on, water and electricity, trains and port services, fuel, etc. Those are costs that are actually still going into government coffers that we haven't considered. And to round off, I think the joint approach in terms of sustainability, we have a number of peers doing the same thing in the same areas with the same communities. So having a joint force, joint hand in terms of sustainability projects, as well as in terms of joining forces, as it were, to look at the common enemy in terms of the security challenges, pulling those resources together as industry rather than a separate mining house, bringing strategies together and aligning it in a collective to be able to deal with this is where we need to go. Thank you very much, Andries.
Thanks. Any final word to you?
Thank you, Andries. I believe that possible interventions to mitigate the threat would include indeed a whole of government approach. Although I haven't referred to that during the previous answers, indeed SARS are critical in our approach to mitigate the threat and to address criminality decisively because they've got powerful legislation. But in essence, all departments need to play their part. Otherwise, we will be fragmented in our approach. In addition to that, our multidisciplinary integrated public-private partnership is critical, and we need to build on already existing good partnerships in good faith, as it was earlier stated by Neil. That's critical. Then I believe that we can also tighten control measures at ports of entries, not just in terms of individuals that is coming into the country, but also exports. Because you will find that bulk stolen material like chrome and platinum group metals are leaving our shores via ports of entry, harbors, as well as they are being flown out of the country. So I believe that can indeed assist tremendously. And then I'm in strong support of fostering strong global, regional, and local cooperation, and to strengthen mechanisms and strategies to successfully address the threat with specific reference to strong investigative and intelligence capabilities. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, so in summary, I believe the mining industry has really got fantastic value that it can contribute to all its stakeholders. I believe we need fantastic collaboration in order to make that work. In other words, with local communities to create that sustainable local environment, but with fellow countries around the globe to address these value chains, and certainly between business and government, the various state organs in the country, provide that capacity and to deal with the very challenging environment that we're in. Thank you, everyone, for participating today, for the panel, and thanks for listening and the questions posted on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andries. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the webinar. I'd like to say very much a big thank you to our facilitator, Andries Rousseau, for enabling a robust and engaging discussion. Thank you also to our panelists, Neil Pretorius from DRD Gold, Graham Trussler from Digby Wells Environmental, Brigadier Henny Flynn from the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation of the SAPS, and Nash Lutchman, a mining security and law enforcement professional. Thank you to our sponsors, Digby Wells Environmental, Astron Energy, Axis House, DRD Gold, and MLT Group for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on South African mining security and sustainability. We hope you found the event engaging and informative. We thank you for participating. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course, and if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you for your time, and goodbye.